Hi, I'm Dave. I'm an indie game developer from Romania, currently working on a title called Tale and Ale. It's a turn-based mobile RPG and it's gonna be available on Android Store sometime in the future. Stay tuned. I'm sure you've all noticed in games all those sparks, explosions, things flying everywhere on the screen, pieces of boxes, wood, smoke, dirt, and you're wondering, how did they do that? How is that thing made behind the scenes? I'm gonna show you exactly how I did it for my game, coming right up.
First, I went to a new scene I created, just for testing, and I made a new class called Particle Spawner. Now, I wasn't quite sure how I was gonna do it, but I knew I needed an interval variable, which would hold an interval of milliseconds, between which particles are spawned, aka images are created on the screen. So I created a function which spawns images, and this function takes as parameter a bitmap data, which is basically the source image. This function creates an image of type ImageX, which is just an advanced image class that's easy to work with that I created. It's going to spawn the images on a layer called Particles layer, which I'll create later in the scene. The interval in milliseconds is 1000, so this function will be repeated every 1 second. I'll just import the whole stencil library. As for the image, I choose the image of a cheese. So our particle spawner is going to spawn cheese. I also figured every time it should spawn the image at a different position, so I set the X and the Y of each image that is spawned to a random number between 0 and 200. Finally, after some tweaks and some cleanup, I finally managed to make the cheese spawn. Little did I know this was only the beginning of something much more fabulous. I needed to have this particle spawner very customizable. I created a parameter for the creation of the particle spawner called settings. For now, I tried using another class that I created a long time ago called ImageX Extended, which has even more properties than the regular ImageX. I also created a function called AgeImages. This function basically, for every image that is on the screen from this particle spawner, every 20 milliseconds is going to increase the age of the image by 20 milliseconds. And at some point when the image reaches a certain age, for example 1 second, this function is going to kill that image. Well, unfortunately my old ImageX Extended did not do the job that I wanted it to do, so I had to create a new class called Particle Image. Yeah, that went as well as you'd expect, so I ran into some errors, which I'm not gonna bore you with how I fixed those. Eventually, I got it working. And here's the result. Yes, it's cheese. These particles of ours are going to spawn inside a circle, and the circle has a center point defined by, a center X and Y, just the regular coordinates of course, and a radius. And so I wasn't quite sure how to spawn a random point inside a circle, so I googled it, and to choose a random point inside a circle, you need to choose a random angle between 0 and 360 degrees and a random radius from 0 to the maximum radius of the circle. The second part is transforming the coordinates from an angle and a radius into an X and Y coordinates. How do we do that, you ask?
Math.
Oh, don't worry, it's not that complicated, it's just basic sine and cos math. You know, I'll put those on the screen somewhere, hopefully. Little did I know what was coming up next. I had no idea resizing images in Stencil is such a pain in the ass, and that's probably because the documentation for images is pretty bad. Anyway, I created two more variables, size min and size max, which define the starting size of these images. This whole size thing really bugged me because I just could not get it to work properly. So, like any good programmer, I just swept the whole thing under the rug and moved on to rotation. This one was a lot easier. I also implemented the rotation speed, so every time an image would age, aka every 20 milliseconds, the image would also rotate by a certain amount. Yeah, that's what I thought. Because oh boy, did Stencil have big plans for me. Apparently, Stencil rotates images from the top left corner by default, not from the middle. By this point, I decided to take a break. I was frustrated, tired, and hungry, so I went to eat some pancakes. I came back the next day and decided to try a couple new things. I had to set the origin point for the image at the middle of the image. So that's half of the width of the image. I also had to divide the width by 4 because Stencil, and then multiply it with the zoom amount of the game. I had finally managed to get it working. Okay, next. I knew I wanted to make particles go in a certain direction. And that direction, of course, is an angle between 0 and 360 degrees. For more randomness, I also made a direction variance, which adds or subtracts randomly a small number from the direction. And of course, for that, I need a speed. The speed at which the particles will move in that certain direction. If I want to have speed in a certain direction, I need to translate that speed into x speed and y speed. And again, I did that with
Geometry.
transparency for particles was piece of cake. Next up is gravity. This might sound complicated, but it's actually very simple. Every time we age an image, aka every 20 milliseconds, we change the speed of the image by a certain amount. So, it appears that an image will have an acceleration, or gravity. If the change in speed is negative, it's going to look like gravity. If it's positive, it's going to look like acceleration. Okay, by now the particle spawner was actually complete. But I was not gonna give up just yet. I was going to make a really good particle spawner with an interface like Unity. It's going to have all sorts of parameters, sliders, checkboxes to make the particle spawner in a user-friendly way. I made this with a simple HTML page and JavaScript. No libraries, only Bootstrap, which is a CSS library to make things look smoother. Next, I had to implement the same particle spawner in JavaScript, which shouldn't be very hard because JavaScript is very similar to Hex. I then created in no time all the options necessary for the particle spawner. Now I just have to move some sliders, tick some checkboxes, and we're good to go. The particle spawner is going to change as soon as I change the sliders and checkboxes. I needed a way to transport the particle spawner from JavaScript to Hex, So I made a simple text box in which I generated some hex code with those exact settings. Finally, let's put this particle spawner into action. And let's add it to our game. I have this spell called Fireball, which did not have an animation. So I opened AssetWrite, found a free asset of a fireball, and edited it to make it look smooth. I made a particle spawner which spawned red to orange squares, and the fireball will leave those squares behind as a trail. So that's it, that's the particle system. I learned a couple things, such as that Stencil is not that good at working with images. I also learned again some 8th grade math and geometry, and I learned that editing such a video takes a lot longer than making a particle system.
No, really, editing this took a lot longer than I expected.
If you're still around by the end of this video, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button because it would really help me a lot. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video about game design, game development, or programming. You can also follow my Facebook page, which I have linked down in the description.